Hey everyone, in this video I'll be reviewing the Meeker Mark 30 Griffon Volt. This blaster is based off Flygonial's Griffon, but with some cosmetic parts by Meeker to make it look more like the Volt from Titanfall 2. I'm really excited to talk about this blaster because I've barely seen anything about it online. To my knowledge, only 2 other people have spoken about or posted photos of this blaster online, and one of them is Meeker himself, so it's safe to say this is a fairly unique blaster. For those who don't know, the Volt is a fictional weapon from Titanfall 2 and Apex Legends. The Volt is my favorite gun in both games because it has the quickest reload speed and a really cool firing sound. The visual design of the Volt is slightly different between the 2 games, and the Griffon Volt resembles the Titanfall 2 version more than the Apex version. I'd like to mention that this isn't a 1-to-1 scale replica of the Volt for anyone who wants to use this for cosplay purposes. The magwell also doesn't extend as far down as the Volt's does, so that might be a big deal breaker for some of you. I purchased the files for this blaster from Meeker on Etsy, but some of the parts in my specific build are from Flygonial's Griffon files, which can be found for free on Thingiverse. If you don't have access to your own 3D printer, you'll need to purchase the files and then commission someone to print or make you one, as no one currently sells them in an online store. One purchase of the files will cover an unlimited number of builds for yourself or friends paying for the cost of filament, or one paid commission. Most of this blaster is printed at 20% infill, except for the grip frame, flywheel cage, and I think the magwell joint, but I'm not 100% sure. These were printed at around 40% infill. I used white and orange PLA Plus from 3D Phillies, and olive drab PLA from eSun. Titanfall fans should recognize this as the same color scheme as BT from Titanfall 2's campaign. Most of the files for this blaster have already been oriented in the best way for printing, however I had to flip the shroud in Cura as it was having trouble printing on the Ender 5. The heat of the bed didn't allow the thin parts of the print to cool properly and caused them to fall off during the print. Flipping it means you will end up wasting filament for supports, but it makes it less likely to fail. Outside of the 3D printed parts, you also need some standard flywheel blaster hardware such as motors, flywheels, a micro switch, and wires. You also need a return spring for the trigger. I used 2 to give mine some extra strength, a fair amount of 12mm M2.5 screws, some sort of pin to hold down the gear for the pusher in place. I used a cut down paper clip, and you'll need 1/2 inch and 3/4 inch PVC pipes for the barrel and stock reinforcement. I got my PVC pipes from Bunnings, but I couldn't find the exact dimensions listed on the Etsy page, so I substituted them for the pipe dimensions in the description below. You'll also need some sort of elastic shock cord for the stock catch and mag release. The files include both a full-length and half-length magwell, along with the necessary rails and wire covers for whichever dart length you pick. Unfortunately, I'm not sure whether the mag release lever for the half-length magwell is designed for talons or katanas, since I'm not actually using it. I'll touch on why later. The battery is stored in the foregrip, which is held in place by a screw on either side and a screw on the bottom. I don't think the bottom screw is necessary though, so I don't use it, since the foregrip is secure enough with just the side screws. There's a fair amount of room in the foregrip for a LiPo. I can fit my Stripes 3S LiPo in there with ease, but it looks like there's enough space to fit a slightly larger LiPo if you have one. The most unique part of this design is the folding stock. The stock's locking mechanism uses an elastic shock cord to hold this lever down and lock the stock in place. However, this system isn't the most reliable. Unless you're constantly tightening the screws around the pivot, the lever slides out of place with any sort of sideways force, causing the stock to fold. I somewhat fixed this by shoving a small amount of blue tack in between the lever and the ledge where it locks to prevent it from moving while the blaster is being shaken. It will still unstick and collapse if there's enough force applied though. The stock also doesn't seem to have a locking mechanism to keep it in place while it's folded, so I wouldn't recommend playing with this blaster while the stock is collapsed unless you're okay with it constantly slapping the side of your blaster. For those curious, the Griffon Volt's parts are slightly different to Flygonial's original design, so there isn't 100% compatibility with parts. For the sake of simplicity, I'll be referring to Meeker's Mark 30 Griffon Volt as the Mark 30, and Flygonial's original design as the original. The core parts of the blaster are almost identical. The Mark 30 has been slightly modified to use M2.5 screws instead of the original's M3 screws, and the recesses for the screw heads have been removed. The biggest difference between the Mark 30 and the original is that the Mark 30 uses an elastic shock cord as the return mechanism for the mag release instead of a spring. I wasn't a fan of seeing the elastic cord sticking out, and I just bought a set of springs for the trigger anyway, so I decided to mesh both designs together to let my Mark 30 use a spring for its mag release. To do this, I printed the Talon mag release, grip frame, and grip side plates from the original's files and used them instead of the ones from the Mark 30's files. According to the Etsy page, the trigger is supposed to use a shock cord as its return mechanism, but I was too lazy to actually try and figure it out, so I just used compression springs instead. The Mark 30's grip also features a loop at the bottom for a sling or lanyard, while the original does not. The only other part of the Mark 30 which has been drastically altered is the motor cover, which has been opened at the front to allow the wires to pass freely from the foregrip to the motors. This means the original's motor cover will not be compatible with this design. The blaster has been assembled as intended by Meeker, but I use 12mm M3 screws to hold the foregrip in place, and I use an 18mm M3 screw to attach the bottom of the stock to the grip frame. The wiring is a bit annoying to get in place, as the wire channels are slightly different from the Mark 30 compared to the original. The wires move from the grip frame to the right side panel, then into the flywheel cage riser, and finally into the foregrip. This can make maintaining this blaster a bit of a hassle, as the wires will keep most of the blaster in place even after you've removed all the screws. My biggest gripe with this design is it makes screwing the flywheel cage into the magwell very awkward. The riser sits right on top of where the screws are, and there's no way to tighten the screws through the riser. You have to screw the flywheel cage into the magwell with the riser hanging off to the side and in the way because it's still slightly connected to the blaster with the wires. It's a bit annoying, but it's manageable. If I get enough comments for a build guide, I might try recording the build process if I ever decide to build a full-length Mark 30. Moving on to performance, I'm using a 40mm Daybreak cage with Neo Rhinos running on 3S. It's hitting an average of 147 FPS with Gen 3 worker darts with a high of 161 and a low of 136. The barrel is only 19 centimeters long and it has quite a large inner diameter, so I don't think it's affecting performance that much. If you don't want to use a 40mm cage, the files also include a 41mm cage, and if you contact Meeker on Etsy, he can provide other flywheel spacings upon request. Now let's go outside and see it shoot. You may have noticed that there are still some issues I need to work on with this blaster. The first being the pusher mechanism, which doesn't seem to reliably return all the way after each trigger pull. This issue can be negated by pulling the trigger quickly and as far back as possible, but I would like to make sure that it works 100% of the time. I would also like to find a way to lock the stock in properly, as the blue tack will eventually lose its stickiness over time. Overall, I'm very happy about the performance of this blaster, and it could end up replacing my Strife as my go-to flywheeler, especially since Sydney Nerf has been having a huge shift towards half-length darts recently. As of recording this video, I haven't been able to run this at an event, so I can't comment on how well it performs on the field. But seeing how it's based off of a Griffin, it should perform as any flywheeler should. If you're looking into a new flywheel blaster and you really like Titanfall or Apex, I recommend you check out the Griffin Volt. Just keep in mind that the files aren't free, so it might be a little bit more expensive than a regular Griffin build. Anyway, that's it for this video. Thanks for watching, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.